And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska marine weather outlook for this coming weekend, Saturday, Sunday. It is February 23rd, 2024, Friday afternoon, providing this recording and update. Quick check of the sea ice edge. We've had the sea ice retreat a bit here in the southeast corner of the Bering around Bristol Bay. A number of polynyas have opened up along the Norton Sound coastline and along the southwest shore. And there still may be a little retreat for a little while longer here down in this area. Otherwise, the pattern is going to be changing, and we're going to have another area of low pressure track across the lower Bering into the Gulf very late this weekend, Sunday night into early next week. And eventually by early next week, we're going to get northeast to north winds returning with some much colder air by the middle and latter part of this upcoming week. So we expect things to refreeze, and the ice may actually push southward next week. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, the weather map late this Friday night into early Saturday morning, we have an area of low pressure in the western Gulf that'll hug along the Kenai coastline, provide some additional snowfall, Anchorage Bowl along the Seward Highway to Seward. Also, this secondary low in front pushing up into the Panhandle could create some additional snowfall. Winter weather advisories are in effect for Petersburg, Wrangell down toward Prince of Wales Island, 2 to 5 inches of snow there. As much as 6 to 10 inches of snow could fall hillside in Anchorage on over toward Eagle River on Saturday. And then going into Saturday, we find this double barrel low, one in the northwest Gulf, the other just off the coastline there of the Panhandle. And then here comes that low that's going to be the pattern changer for next week. It's going to be lifting northeastward across the central Aleutians on Sunday into the lower Bering, and then it's going to stop moving northward and start heading more eastward. And that's going to eventually emerge here in the Gulf and strengthen, bringing stronger winds across, especially the Alaska Peninsula in the wake of that, and then across areas of the Gulf as it gets going here early next week. And then there beyond it, just going to draw down much colder air on northeast to north winds, especially along the west side of the state. Looking at what we can expect marine weather-wise here this weekend, Saturday, inner channel, south-southeast winds there. Stevens Passage down through Ketchikan, Metlakatla. As high as 25 knots with 6 to 8 foot waves, Dixon Entrance. North end here, we expect north winds to 20 knots, 3-4 foot waves there in Lynn Canal, and then the outer coast with that front and low pressure approaching, we expect south to southeast and then easterly winds, generally in the around 25 knots, and swells as high as 10 to 14 feet Sitka southward, and then 7 to 9 feet to the north. And then on Sunday, winds will be north-northwest, inner channels as high as 30 knots there at Lynn Canal with gusts of 45 knots. Seas building as high as, waves there as high as 6 to 8 feet, 4 feet down here toward Dixon Entrance. The outer coast, we're starting to see either northerly, northwesterly flow 25 knots Sitka southwards with 13 to 16 foot swells, and then offshore northeast flow 20 to 25 knots outside of Yakutat Bay with 10 to 12 foot waves. For the northwestern Gulf, winds are going to be westerly at the entrance of Cook Inlet, 7 to 8 foot swells. Easterly winds into Prince William Sound, because we have that area of low pressure right in this region, providing accumulating snow, especially along the Seward Highway and up through Turnagain Pass, and then up toward Anchorage, the Anchorage Bowl, all through the Chugach and eastern and western Kenai Mountains. So that's something to keep in mind if traveling. And then Sunday, we expect winds to generally be out of the northwest across much of the region, 30, 35 knots here in the northwestern Gulf outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, as high as 40 knot west to northwest gales there in lower Cook Inlet and northeast of Kodiak City with 10 to 11 foot swells. Across Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula Saturday, we're looking at westerly winds, 30 knots, Kodiak Island, and then generally 25 knots going down the length of the Alaska Peninsula. Swells 6 to 8 feet on the North Pacific side and 7 to as high as 11 feet on the Bering side, especially north of Cold Bay. And then for Sunday, we expect westerly winds around Kodiak Island, 25 to 30 knots. Still westerly, north Port Hayden, east of Chicknick, but then those winds are going to start turning back around to the southeast, 20-25 knots in advance of that low pressure that'll be north of the central Aleutians and working its way eastward. And looking at the Aleutian chain here for Saturday, generally west winds the central eastern Aleutians as high as 25 knots around Dutch Harbor, eastern Aleutians, falling off to 15 knots and then going back toward the southwest at about 15 to 25 knots. On Sunday, that low lifts across the central Aleutians, gets located up here. So ahead of it, southeast south winds to 30 knots, becoming southwest to west, and swells generally running 10 to 12 feet on the Pacific side and 8 to 11 feet on the Bering side. And looking at the southwest coast, west winds 20 knots into Kuskokwim Bay, west winds 25 knots into Bristol Bay, westerly winds across the Pribilof Islands at St. Paul and St. George, and westerly winds to 20 knots into Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon Delta. But by Sunday, with that low down in the lower portion of the Bering Sea, winds are going to try to turn back toward the east, some sort of easterly component, still northerly out of Bristol Bay, but easterly 15 knots within Kuskokwim Bay. Easterly gales to 35 knots there at St. Paul and St. George. Southeast winds 10 knots off the lower Yukon Delta, and west winds into Norton Sound at 15 knots. For the Bering Strait, south of there, winds will be west-southwest, 15 to as high as 25 knots there north of Gamble. The lower Chukchi Sea, east-northeast winds 10 to 15 knots, but still 35-knot east-northeast winds Point Lay up to Wainwright. And then along the Arctic coast, look for east-northeast winds 15 to 20 knots with plenty of ice still in place, and then a split in the winds. Sunday, westerly winds 10 knots around Kaktovik, but Prudhoe Bay through Utqiagvik and Wainwright, easterly winds increasing to 25 knots, whereas further south the winds will be more west-southwest 10 to 15 knots all the way down through the lower Chukchi Sea, south of the Bering Strait to along the north side of St. Lawrence Island and into Norton Sound.